What an unbelievable last couple of months we have had watching the Rugby World Cup in France. We've seen some unreal action from the pool stages right through to the knockout games. We've had some really entertaining games which are really high scoring, but we've also seen some really tightly contested knockout fixtures decided by the finest of margins by a single point in some cases, with plenty of controversy and red and yellow cards to put in the mix as well. It's a Rugby World Cup that's definitely delivered on so many levels and provides a really good basis to improve the level of international rugby going forward. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing the 7 things in which we have learned from this year's Rugby World Cup. As always, please do let me know if you agree or disagree with my points, and feel free to add in anything you feel I may have missed. I'm sure there's plenty of points, so let me know in the comment section down below. Start off with point number 1 is the rise of the Tier 2 nations. Now, we definitely probably saw a rise of the Tier 2 nations before the World Cup, with some unbelievable performances over the last couple of the years. My mind goes straight away to Georgia beating Wales in the last minute from a penalty, which was a huge statement from the Tier 2 teams, as well as probably Italy beating Australia. Some really good games that Italy have played as well. So some really good Tier 2 nation victories prior to the tournament. I feel that's taken to a new level in this tournament. We saw probably fan favourites, Portugal, I think that's safe to say, put on some really good rugby, doing some good stuff against Wales, and then went on to nearly beat Georgia, but definitely did amazingly well to beat Fiji in their last game of the pool stages. So Portuguese were definitely a massive name now in the world of rugby, and hopefully they get more Tier 1 fixtures going forward. We also saw the likes of Uruguay really test France in one of their fixtures, which was a real good watch. We never like to see Tier 2 nations get completely blown away, and it's really good for the game when they compete as well. So the rise of the Tier 2 nations was definitely one of the main things to take out of the World Cup, and you can only hope they get more game time against the best of teams going forward. Point number 2, practical rugby beats attractive rugby. This is mainly relating to the final between South Africa and New Zealand. New Zealand played some unbelievable stuff in there, some really good fast-flowing rugby, and they've actually probably played the better, more attractive rugby throughout the match. But it was the pragmatism and the clinical edge of the Springboks combined with some really good defence that won them the match. So it goes to show that the passing around of the ball and the high-level skills of attacking rugby doesn't always win you test matches, especially in the knockout games where they come down to such fine margins. And it was the sort of the clinical edge of Handré Pollard's boot which won them the match. So that's definitely a takeaway point when we consider knockout rugby. Point number 3, I think this is widely regarded and is a passionate point throughout the hearts of all rugby fans, but sort out the draw World Rugby. We've definitely seen a completely lopsided draw in this year's Rugby World Cup. It's a real shame because I felt like, especially the New Zealand-Argentina semi-final, it wasn't really a spectacle. The fans weren't really getting behind it. I saw plenty of empty seats, which is a little bit disappointing considering it's a Rugby World Cup semi-final. So a rejig of the draw, making a draw way closer to the time, will definitely benefit the tournament. Some would argue it didn't really impact the tournament because we just had the semi-finals a week earlier in the quarter-finals, which is definitely true with the likes of France, South Africa and New Zealand, Ireland, which are some of my favourite games over the last 4 years. And were just unbelievable test matches that will go down in history. So yeah, I definitely think they should sort out the draw so we have the best games and the biggest of spectacles where they really matter, and they deserve the pedestal of a World Cup semi-final to really add to the occasion. Point number 4, cards were crucial. It was a worry going into the World Cup that we'd see some cards given out in the highest of level fixtures. We saw it on the opening, England's opening game against Argentina, a red card, a yellow card. For incidents which some would argue weren't too far apart. And then we saw in the World Cup final 4 cards given out, 3 yellows and 1 red, which played an instrumental role in the game. And I'm not going to say it cost New Zealand because South Africa could have won it anyway, but it definitely didn't help New Zealand's cause, which is disappointing considering South Africa will want to say that they've beaten the strongest All Blacks 15, but they beat the strongest All Blacks 15 for probably, 20 minutes? I can't remember now. And then they went down to 14 men. So the best teams want to beat the best teams without them conceding cards because it adds to their credibility, and it's also disappointing for the team that concede the card because the chances of winning the game diminish quite considerably. So that's just one of the points in which I've pulled out. Let me know if you think it's fair enough. I mean, you have to card the teams which infringe the most, or do you think it takes away from the spectacle of rugby and sort of reduces the appeal to fans? Point number 5 is the Northern flop. Going into the tournament, I thought the Northern Hemisphere teams, France and Ireland, to name the two which really had the hopes of Northern Hemisphere rugby on their shoulders. They both went out in the quarterfinals, which is a huge blow to Northern Hemisphere rugby, especially with Ireland and France occupying really spot on the number 1 and number 2 on the world rankings, and they got completely knocked off of that pedestal by New Zealand and South Africa. And South Africa actually hold a very healthy lead at the top of that table now. Not that the world rankings mean an awful lot, but it definitely goes to show the form of teams. And Northern Hemisphere teams continue to struggle against the Southern Hemisphere teams in knockout rugby. I'm planning on doing a video trying to explain potentially why I thought this was, but we really did see some great performances from the Southern Hemisphere, so they deserve their credit, that's for sure. Point number 6, unreal travelling support. This one mainly goes to the Irish, hence why it's written in green, although we did see some great travelling support from the Southern Hemisphere teams from the likes of New Zealand and South Africa. But the Irish fans singing Zombie was one of my favourite moments since I've been watching rugby. Just the unreal atmosphere of a group and a nation really getting behind their team. It's not the biggest of journeys from Dublin to Paris. I mean, it's not exactly a walk, but it's far closer than it is going down to the Southern Hemisphere team. So fair play to the Irish. They definitely got behind their team, and it made for an unreal atmosphere and a real cauldron and a real spectacle. A very noisy arena, which just added to the spectacle completely. And for anyone watching it at home with the TV almost rattling off of its hinges with all the Irish support, and the South African support in the South Africa-Ireland game was also good. So we've seen some really good support throughout the tournament for travelling teams, which is brilliant to see. And then point number 7, a little bit of a somber note, is an end of an era. We say this after every World Cup, but for me especially, who have only really been watching rugby for the last 10 years, I'd say. When I first started watching rugby, I saw the likes of Jonathan Sexton is the sort of the figurehead for Ireland. Dan Biggar was the figurehead for Wales. These were really big names that were coming through, and now they're coming towards the end of their time. So the fly half for Ireland of Johnny Sexton and the fly half of Wales, Dan Biggar, the only two real big name fly halves I've known for the respective countries. And growing up as a fly half myself, I aspired to be like these people, like Farrell, for example, and a lot of them are moving on now. We've seen the likes of Sam Whitelock for New Zealand moving on. There's so many players in which have been idols to my generation, generations prior to me, which are moving on. So it's always a shame, but it also brings a huge amount of opportunity for youth coming through, and it'll be very interesting to see how the team shapes up and how the teams in World Rugby shape up over the next a year or two, or even 6 months if we look at the Six Nations ahead. We've seen some younger players retire. Look at Bowden Barrett and Richie Mwanga. They're relatively young to be retiring from international rugby, but are going to focus on their club rugby and making a few shillings somewhere else. So fair play to them, each of their own. But an end of an era, and with that comes a lot of opportunity for the youth of today, and it'll be very interesting to see the direction in which these international teams go in the future. But that sums up my 7 points and my 7 takeaways from this year's Rugby World Cup. Let me know your thoughts on them in the comment section down below. And thank you very much for following my videos and following my journeys throughout the World Cup. It's been much appreciated. And thank you very much for watching.